If you've used InterSystems products to develop HL7 integrations, you're probably familiar with what we call the curly brace syntax for identifying a virtual property. For instance, in a 2.3.1 ADT-A01 message, HL7.curlybrace PID5 in parentheses 1.2 refers to the patient's name in the PID segment, specifically their first name. Right, so notice how I wrote patient name, the actual name of the field, and then given name, the name of the subfield. Up here, above the 5 and the 2, our syntax supports either the name or the number of the field, right? You can choose either, but throughout this presentation, I'll be using numbers just for the sake of brevity. Also notice the 1 inside these parentheses here. So the presence of the parentheses themselves indicates that this is a repeating field, right? That this field may have multiple iterations, multiple occurrences, because the patient may have more than one name. The 1 inside the parentheses indicates that we are specifically, with this expression, referring to the first iteration of the field, so the first name, the first name of the patient, right? So if I had put a 2 inside these parentheses, we'd be referring to the second iteration of the patient's name, and so on. So if I were to leave these parentheses blank, we would see some unwanted behavior and unexpected results. It's bad practice to leave a set of parentheses in a repeating segment or field blank using the curly brace syntax because it's not going to give you the results you want. I see this most often in our data transformations. If you leave a blank set of parentheses, when you go to test your data transformation, it's not going to give you the results that you want. Now let's consider the patient address field, or PID11. Here is the patient address field, PID11, for one patient who has addresses in 3 different states. And so now let's say that I'm developing a routing rule, and for insurance reasons, I want to check to see if my patient has an address in the state of New York, and maybe send it to a different place based on whether the answer is yes or no. Using this curly brace syntax, I would first need to check if the first occurrence of PID11.4, 4 being the subfield for state, equals NY. And then I would have to check if the second occurrence equals NY, and so on. And, since there's going to be a variable number of addresses that come in with each message, I would probably have to write some fancy code, some array logic. My brain hurts just thinking about it. Enter the parentheses syntax. The parentheses syntax is designed to make it easier to refer to all of the occurrences of a repeating field at once. So syntactically, it looks exactly like the curly brace syntax, except I'm replacing the curly braces with parentheses. So here we have HL7.parenthesis PID11, open and close parens, .4. So notice that I left these parentheses blank. So the value of this statement, of this expression, is a concatenation of all of the occurrences of the state surrounded by angle brackets, each one surrounded by angle brackets. And so this way, we can use a simple contain statement to figure out if the value that we're looking for is included at all within this field in any of the occurrences. So notice that I included the angle brackets here in my contain statement, even though I technically don't need them, right? I could get rid of these angle brackets and the expression would still evaluate to true. But we want to get in the habit of including the angle brackets lest we run into a situation like this, let's say 150 and 1000, and we're checking for the value 100. If I didn't include the angle brackets here, this would erroneously evaluate to true, right? But if I did include the angle brackets, then this would correctly evaluate to false. So we want to get in the habit of including the angle brackets for all occurrences. A couple more things to note here. First is that if the subfield that we're referring to is blank in one or more of the occurrences, that's represented by a pair of empty angle brackets. If we look at address line 2 here, right, so for the second address line, notice that it's blank for our New York address. So the value of HL7 PID11.2 would be 7th floor, and then a pair of empty angle brackets and then unit 2. So we do account, using the empty angle brackets, we account for instances where the subfield is blank. Second is that you can still use this syntax to refer to a single occurrence of a repeating field, right? So if I were to pop a 1 inside these parentheses here, this would just evaluate to MA with the angle brackets. So when we're referring to a single occurrence using this parentheses syntax, we put the angle brackets around the value. Third is that this parentheses syntax is best used within our routing rules. So for data transformations, we don't really recommend that you use this because it can lead to unwanted results. If you want to loop over every iteration of a repeating segment or field in a data transformation, that requires a special set of actions which are outside the scope of this video. And finally, everything that I just talked about here, these two syntaxes and the difference between them, are unique to InterSystems technologies. You won't find this in the HL7 world outside of InterSystems products.